Outlaw Adam Knight?
As I'm known in some circles, yes.
That is fantastic. My name is Stevie J. I want to thank you for being on Thursday Night AMP, and my co-host Jason Harlan, a.k.a. Great Sudoku, is also here. Jason, say hello.
Hey, Adam.
Sudoku, eh? Interesting. I'm more of a chess and crossword guy myself, and by that I mean I read the newspaper.
Well, why don't you tell him how you got that name, and then we'll ask him how he got his.
Sure, yeah. The newspaper Sudokus are so easy. I do those in pen. There's books I buy at Barnes & Noble, like the third degree, third degree black belt ones that I can do in about 15 or 20 minutes. It takes me to do one of the puzzles. But yeah, it's like I'm probably within like the top 5% of Sudoku solvers in the world. So that's kind of why I use the Great Sudoku. There's wrestlers, the Great Muda, the Great Kabuki. So, hey, I'm the Great Sudoku.
Hey, well, fair enough. Certainly don't sell yourself short when you're putting yourself over, so that's all right.
Absolutely, and don't sell yourself short either. Tell everybody why you're the outlaw.
Well, mostly because I have a problem with authority, and I fought the law and the law won. No, I'm kidding. It's an exaggeration, of course. I am the Outlaw Adam Knight because about 10 or 12 years ago, as I got to that point in my career, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do as far as an in-ring presence went. I kind of realized I had this thing for cowboy movies and black hats and those guys who showed up like Ron Bass and more specifically I'm obviously talking about Stan Hansen, guys who would show up and take no prisoners and leave no one behind, and win, lose, or draw, you knew you were going to get a fight. And I'll tell you, there's nothing the Outlaw Adam Knight likes more than showing up and having a fight.
Mm-hmm. So you obviously picked the right name for your character, but what just led your desire into becoming a pro wrestler in the first place? Is it something you were hooked on from an early age?
Well, I don't think anybody gets into pro wrestling unless they have that, that lust, that desire, that connection to it, that, helps them figure out, that aspect of themselves to get rid of. Like, obviously, I grew up many, many years ago. I'm from Winnipeg, Manitoba. Here in Winnipeg, obviously, the AWA was an institution for the longest time. Way back when I was a very young man, my father was actually a vendor at the old Winnipeg Arena where the AWA would run every 4 or 5 weeks. So I was very, very young and would get to go and hang out, and my dad would go up and down the aisles hawking beers and cokes, and I would get to sit there and watch Nick Bockwinkel, go 60 minutes with the guy. So that was always fascinating to me. Obviously, that translated into the WWF when things got changed up here in Canada. Didn't have much NWA access, but obviously I always enjoyed watching these larger-than-life superheroes getting in the ring, wearing their fancy colors, and entertaining thousands and thousands and thousands of people every night. It was something that really connects with you, something that stays with you. And was it something that growing up I ever figured it was something that I would do myself? Not really. But as I got older and as I got bigger and as I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do in life, I made connections with people that were involved in the local wrestling scene here in Winnipeg. I sort of towed myself into the water, and, well, that was in 1995, and now here we are in 2015, and I still lace the boots, I still beat people's asses, and I love making the people scream when I do it.
Absolutely. That's what pro wrestling is all about. But before we jump into more modern times, I have to stick with the AWA for just a second because that's the big territory where I was growing up. That's all my grandpa ever watched. That was my first introduction to pro wrestling. He had a satellite receiver just so he could watch AWA every week. So I have to ask you, out of all those guys back in those days, who is your favorite champion? You already mentioned Bockwinkel. There's also, from what I remember from childhood, there's Jumbo Tsuruta, Rick Martel, Stan Hansen, who you mentioned as well. Who is your favorite champion out of all of those?
It's really hard to say. I was pretty young at the time, and so a lot of it comes as a blur. I remember watching, more going back and watching it now on tape or on DVD or whatever, and get my hands on the internet, and sort of see what I can come up with there. I sort of rewatch now and look at it from a different perspective, and that really makes me smile. Being there live, champion, I'm not really too sure, but I remember being there as a kid, and like Baron Von Raschke was awesome. I loved, Duck Russia was amazing when I was a kid, which sounds so silly, but he was phenomenal. I always remember several years later, after the AWA stopped running, I remember making a trip to Minnesota with my family and finding out that Baron Von Raschke was actually working as a security guard at the Minneapolis Zoo on the monorail, which blew my mind. I'm like, these guys have real jobs. What's up with that? But
Whoa.
getting to see him in person and have him, realize he's been recognized and give you the stare and threaten you with the claw at like 9 years old. It was amazing. So it was, that was something else.
Well, that's just like George the Animal Steel, too, though. When he wasn't doing pro wrestling, he was a school teacher.
Absolutely, which is, gobsmacked. You look at that and like, how does that work? But people go, well, you're a pro wrestler. Why are you writing books? And like, I understand. It's a transgression of opinions. It's certainly a weird thing, but I just made up a whole phrase there. But that's all right. No, if I had to pick a favorite champion in the AWA, you got to go with the king. You got to go with the boss. You got to go with the man, and that's Nick Bockwell. He was the best. Just pound for pound, the classiest, greatest champion in the history of wrestling, as far as I'm concerned. With no disrespect to anybody else out there, Bockwell was the man. So.
Mm-hmm. He's one of the few people that ever had a title versus title match that, historically you can look back and go on the fact that Bob Backlund, when he was the champion of the WWF, and Nick Bockwinkel, when he was a champion of the AWA, there was so much respect for both of those champions that they went to a double count out. That's like unheard of in this day and age.
Well, but the business was different back then, right? Just having those guys get together there, just seeing that match was a spectacle in and of itself, and the fans wouldn't have, crapped on the match in any way, shape, or form. They would have been happy to see. But I'm trying to picture, how do you explain it to anybody else right now? That would be like, there isn't really any comparison, right? It's
the equivalent would be like Kazuchika Okada showing up with the IWGP Championship on Raw and challenging the champion. That's
exactly. That's the best modern day example. Sure.
Okada versus Seth Rollins. You're right. That would be it.
Actually, would be a hell of a freaking match, to be honest with you. But all right.
I'd love to see it. I would pay good money to see it. Not ever going to happen, but, well, then again, I shouldn't say never, because they have been bringing New Japan guys in for WWE events. We've got Jushin Liger working the NXT Brooklyn show in just a month, so anything is possible.
Liger's the man. No, that's fantastic. Yeah, I saw that news and it made me smile. It is interesting to think that maybe in the next 3 to 5 years that, WWE might open their doors a little bit and might have a little bit more, what's good for business is good for everybody, whether or not they're a contracted guy or not. So that's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, they certainly have been going that way, but it wasn't that way back in your day. Every territory was different. Everybody had their own champions, and there wasn't a lot of crossover between the two. So tell us a little about your Scofflaw Outlaw career.
God, I don't even know where to begin. When I broke it in 1995, this is a pre-internet era. So it was, I always like to say I'm the last batch of wrestlers that was brought in the bridging of the old school to the new school, right? I was brought in before the wrestling boom. I was brought in before the Monday Night Wars. I came in at a time when wrestling was like the least coolest thing ever, right? The steroid trials that just happened in the States, so then 1992, the WrestleMania that year, the year I broke in, was WrestleMania 11, which we all know what a burn it out was. Wait, can anyone tell me the main event of that WrestleMania?
Was that the one with Bam Bam Bigelow?
Bam Bam Bigelow and Lawrence Taylor, that's right. Very good. Yeah. There you go. Cookie for you. There we go.
I know my wrestling history, but some of it is pretty ignominious, and that was not a great WrestleMania by any stretch.
The semi-main with Michaels and Diaz was pretty good. There was a couple of good matches on there, just, nothing really to write home about it, especially after the awesomeness that was 10. Anyway, the point is that, we were talking about like a dark time, right? Things were very dreary in the wrestling world, right? And so it was, if you were getting involved, it was because you really had a love for it. And after taking some time away, and I was, I'd finished high school, and I was going to university, and I was trying to figure myself out, and I, like I said, I met with some local guys, and, you're a big fat dude, we can figure something out with you, and let's beat your ass for a while. And, that went on for many, many months. It was a good period of time, and a good learning experience. After that, I got to branch out a little bit and, spread my wings. If there's one thing that I wish I had back then that I have now, it would be easier access in order to contact other territories to get booked other places, because I was about 18 months into my quote-unquote career, where basically I was wrestling with the same guys, every week or every 2 weeks, in, Winnipeg, Central Canada, Regina, like the Central Canadian territory for a while, before anybody I knew at all actually made enough of a contact, made enough of a connection to get booked elsewhere, which was, mind-blowing to me. Like one of the guys that I trained with, I mean. And, he was fortunate enough. He, had gone on the road with a couple of guys and, traveled through the States, and, they made one of those trips down to Memphis, and, he got hooked up with the USWA and moved on from there, and he had himself quite a nice little run. But it was the sort of thing that, I wasn't in a position at, 19 years old to pick up and just, I'm just going to pick up and go. I've got all my ducks in a row. Let's just go and find out what's happening in the worldwide, in the wide wrestling world, and make the contacts and go. Nowadays, it's get online, go on Facebook, there's a wrestling company in the area I want to go, shoot them a message, and open a dialogue. It's a totally different environment, right? And back then, you had to go through, the after mags and go, where are these guys? Where are they? Who would I be talking to? How do I decipher what the name of the booker is? Right? Is this the right person? Am I getting hosed, right? So it's a totally interesting thing. But yeah, I've sort of made myself a nice little career, sort of, wrestling by and large within, 150 to 250 kilometers of my own home. With that said, I've had very good stretches of time where I've done lots of traveling. I've had the opportunity to tour through, the tri-state area, which was great. Did a couple shows for Chikara back in, I want to say 2005. I've been coast to coast in Canada almost. I really want to get out to the Maritimes soon. I've got family out there, and I know a lot of the guys in the scene out there. That's very exciting. I have been through most of the central United States. I've had a chance to go down to Cauliflower Alley Club a couple of times. I'm planning to go again. And I had a chance to not only train in the Old Japan Dojo a couple of years ago, but I also was contracted with Chichiri's company Smash out there, and I made 6 or 7 trips to Japan back in 2010 to go work with them. So I've had a good run.
Well, that is a perfect.
Still having a good run.
Yeah, that is a perfect segue because I know Jason wanted to ask you all about Japan. He is our Japan expert on this show. So, Jason, please take it away.
Yeah, I did. There was a match on YouTube I had seen where you were wrestling Akira Nagami. I saw it was for Smash and for Tajiri. The first question I had, just what it was like to work for Tajiri. Second part of the question is, what is the weirdest food you've ever eaten in Japan?
Interesting. Akira Nagami is a legend out there. Just celebrated his 30th year as a pro wrestler last year, and I was sad that I was never to go out there for it. I really wanted to do that. Getting to compete for Smash was interesting because a few years before that, as I mentioned, I trained in the Old Japan Dojo, but I blew up my knee while I was there. So after, planning to be there for 3 to 6 months, I actually was there 6 days and had to fly home. So that sucked. The reason I tell that story is that, I sort of think, it's a dark time looking at your career, and am I going to hang out in the boots? What am I going to do? Kind of feel embarrassed. You sort of put your life on hold to go across the world to try to, chase your dream and try to make a career of yourself. So when Tajiri started up with the group with Smash, and he started offering these world tryouts, again, the world's changed. As opposed to, having to call somebody, I just sent them an email. And they were specifically looking for people that had experience but had never had, a major break on TV, the hopes of trying to make a new star, which was great. And so they liked my look. I had good references. Tajiri was a young boy back when Rick Patterson, who wrestles in Japan as Leatherface and has for many, many years, was over there, and they have a really good connection. And I've known Rick my entire career. He is one of my references, put me over fantastically, which was great. So that got me in the door. That got me flown out there, and it was interesting. It was a totally different experience. You watch all the tapes and you hear all the stories, and you think, the people are going to sit in their hands and they don't know what to do. And quite frankly, it's not the case anymore. Now, the Japanese audiences, they're quite Americanized as far as what to expect, right? They want to be work. They want you to engage them. They want you to be different. And so I did. And I just went out there, and I sort of went out there with the, this is an all or nothing moment, right? I'm going to go. I'm going to do the very best I can. I'm going to, have a great match with a great veteran, and then I'm going to, see what happens, right? If it works out for me and I get asked back, great. And if I don't, I don't. Going out there, I did my thing. I engaged. I laid my stuff in, if you will, and got to the back, handshakes all around, and Tajiri was, thank you very much. We will have you back. And I was like, F yeah, here we go, right? So it's all good. It's all good, absolutely. No problem. So yeah, so that was going to Japan and wrestling out there, which was fantastic. As far as the weirdest food I ever had, let me try to think about it. I was sort of wondered about how they would have equivalent of a continental breakfast in the hotels there. They had this weird, eggy, pastry-ish thing that I just had never seen before, which was kind of weird and kind of tasted like quiche, but I'm not even sure. Yeah, I got nothing. But I had like 4 or 5 of them in a row, so I guess it couldn't have been that bad.
And yeah, you were talking about the Japanese crowds, and there was one thing that was kind of kicking around in my head with your gimmick, the Outlaw, that there's one thing that they kind of fear and respect the Japanese fans, and, even going back to, like, the Stan Hansen days, it is the large gaijin outlaw with the hat, with the lariat, with the coal miner's glove. It's like, that's something they kind of, can get behind to love or love to hate or both, and I'm wondering if that came into play while you were over wrestling in Japan, too.
That was always sort of my goal, right? I always figured, that, while I sort of figured I was never I was never going to be the cosmetic appearance guy for a North American top company, I always sort of figured I'd be a good fit in Japan for that. I'm a big guy, I work hard, I can have good to great matches depending on my opponents. And when I get out there, I've got the monstrous look that these people just don't have, and I can be that. I can be that second, third generation Hansen guy, which is what I always sort of wanted to do. And getting a chance to go out there and do that, I had a lot of fun with that, and they were very receptive to it.
And I was reading an article on, I think it was Canoe. Yeah, it was the Canoe site where they were talking about your book Cowboy Ending, and that one of the inspirations for your book was Pulp Fiction. I'm a huge Pulp Fiction fan, huge Quentin Tarantino nerd here. I wanted to ask you, what do you think is in that case that they're carrying around there with the 666 combination?
Interesting. I always sort of, want to kick the person who wrote that article, because what I actually said to the guy wasn't that Pulp Fiction was a big inspiration. Not that I have any problem with that movie. I actually meant, like, the concept of Pulp Fiction, like, like the actual genre.
As a genre instead of a title, right?
That's right. That said, I have no idea what's in that case. I got nothing. I've seen the movie a half dozen times, and I still look at that and go, it's more important. The MacGuffin that's in that is not as important as the fact that there's a MacGuffin that's in there. So, and that's an interesting aspect of storytelling, that the older I get and the more experience I get at, creating stories and crafting stories, the more I look at that and go, all right, it don't matter. Right? And these movies are about characters and their actions, not about, what's in the box.
Well, that's actually leading me into a question that I wanted to ask you about being an author, because as you just alluded to, wrestling and writing have something very much in common. They're all about telling stories. So
absolutely.
So how well do you feel it translates, and what initially led you to want to become a published author?
Ironically, it did the opposite direction. I wanted to be a published author for as long as I can remember. That's the one thing that when I was a kid, I always said, this is something I can do. I was not, I'm a big, strong dude now, but I've had to train and work for that. When I was a little kid, who got beat up a lot and, didn't have a lot of friends, I spent a lot of time at the library reading and crafting my own stories and, putting things together. And so that's the one thing that I was always very fascinated by, was the ability to sort of go into my own head and, create something. So that's something I did. I've done my whole life. Wrestling is sort of, something that, I've dovetailed out of, my own desire to be creative and to be, inspiring and to sort of be a superhero, if you will. Because that's really what we are, tights, occasional capes, going out there, diving off ropes onto people, good guys versus bad guys. It's all storytelling, and it's all very much related. I would actually say with, 20 years of a wrestling career behind me, after having traveled to many different places around the world and, meeting a whole bunch of different real-life characters, the inspiration from that to scenes and scenarios in my books and in my writing, they match up so interestingly that it really is it's amazing how well it blends together. With that said, I want to make it very clear. I don't write books about wrestling.
Oh, no.
I write books about people. I write books about characters. I write genre fiction, which is awesome. I love it. That said, because how would you write a wrestling book? Oh, I'm going to tell the stories of a guy going down the roads and hitting the ropes. I'm like, that would be dull. Right? I think. I live this life, so maybe I would think it's dull.
Well, I'm sorry to interject, but I will say that we talked to Paul O'Brien, the author of Blood Red Turnstile Green, and he took a very film noir, gangster-esque approach to the seamy side of wrestling, like the backroom deals and the politics involved, and made a very compelling book out of it, so I think it can be done.
Well, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it can't be done. As a matter of fact, thank you for reminding me of that book. I've been meaning to pick that up and check it out, because I do want to see what he did with that, of course. But at the same time, for me, I'm very odd in the sense that I've got very, very many different creative pursuits, and I told myself, and I swore to myself that when I, sat down to write the book, so that there were going to be, I got to make wrestling references in there, of course. I talk about, especially during some of the action sequences, but they're not really, Nobody's throwing suplexes. I'm not talking about, guys going for payoffs, right?
Right.
I think I did have my guy powerbomb a guy once, but I don't call it that. So it's just sort of, if you know what I'm talking about, you recognize it. But that's not the point, right? I'm very good at separating all of my creative pursuits. When I'm doing wrestling stuff, I do wrestling stuff. When I do my writing stuff, I do writing stuff. When I do film or editing or anything like that, I try to, I like to sort of find a way to satisfy all of my creative inspirations in that regard.
It kind of sounds like you're a jack of all trades then. Wrestler, author, film editor. You just named that, check that as well. What's your current passion right now besides obviously Cowboy Ending and the first of many books to come in that series?
Well, I just finished the second book, which is appropriately titled Outlaw Justice. That's doing quite well on Amazon Smashwords right now. I've got over 300 paid downloads for that right now. It's going to be in 3 bookstores in Winnipeg, that is, by the end of the month, which is going to be great. It's always good having that kind of visibility and exposure in that regard. I sort of swore to myself I'd take a couple weeks off of writing just because I've got, family pursuits and I've got a little girl and I've got a bunch of other stuff I have to do as well. And, on top of everything else, with wrestling, writing, gym training, I still maintain a full-time job because I've got a mortgage and bills and, like I said, little girl to raise, so I'm going to take care of all that. That said, though, I do work still as a video editor. Not very much, very freelancey stuff. I've got a new promotion editor for myself in the works. I rapidly am coming up on my 20th year as a pro wrestler. I sort of want to have a encapsulating sort of, where I've been, where I'm going, what I'm doing right now, highlight reel. I may expand into a documentary thing if I get the urge. And by urge, I mean I have the urge. I've got the timeline all laid up, and I just need the time to work on it. So we'll see. But yeah, no, I'm a bit of a jack of all trades. When I got out of college, about midway through my wrestling career, my goal was to sort of be a home video editor, but that sort of didn't pan out. And still just doing a little bit of everything. I like to keep my fingers in a lot of different pies, and I like to keep my options open.
All right. Well, side question I want to follow out of that is, you mentioned it could possibly become a documentary if you could edit together all your career highlights. Is that something you would go to crowdfunding for? And what do you think of crowdfunding in general?
I wouldn't go to crowdfunding with that because, quite frankly, while I've got a nice little following online, and I've, like I said, 20 years of career, I know people, I've got fans all over the world, I would feel odd going out there and doing that in general because of the reason you mentioned. There's a positive and negative crowdfunding. The positive is if you can actually, deliver on your promises, which is number one. I always look back at the Jeff Katz horrible Wrestling Revolution project that he put together on there, crowdsourced, I don't remember how much money it was, like $250,000, $500,000.
Right.
Brought a bunch of guys in. Those guys all got paid, don't get me wrong, but now everybody who's donating money thinking, I can't wait to see what these guys come up with. It's been almost 4 years now, and nothing's come out of this.
Right. I don't think we ever will see it. I think it's just up in the air at this point.
No, that guy's just, whatever. I don't want to say anything awful about the guy because I know he works in Hollywood and he might produce one of my films one day. But the point is, I'm not going to bury you, buddy, but the fact is you fucked over a lot of people. So it's called like it is.
Yeah.
It all really depends, right? It's no problem. It's if you're going to crowdsource something, you better have a really good idea, and B, the plan to follow through on it, whether you get the funding together or not. Right? I think that's the most important thing. I'm an independent author, and so I would, sometimes I go, man, it'd be kind of nice if I went out there and, maybe I should, crowdfund to get, to put something together so I can, focus more time and dedicate it to writing. But I'm like, well, what do I give people in return? A copy of the book? That's stupid. I don't know where I'd go with that. As far as the documentary goes, these days, if you've got the equipment, and I do, if I want to do a documentary, it's not like I need to go out and hire myself a professional studio. Hell, most iPhone 6s these days have a high-quality enough camera that you can shoot stuff and it would be perfectly acceptable and put it all together and do it that way. So, excuse me, more than anything else, if I'm going to do something like that, it just comes down to committing the time to do it and do it right and not make it look like a piece of garbage.
Absolutely.
That's more important to me.
Yes, so by all means, if you can do it yourself, go ahead and do it that way, because I've backed a lot of Kickstarters myself, and I'm sure if you did do one, you would deliver the end product, because it seems like you've got a good reputation, and you believe in not giving people bullshit or promising shit that you can't deliver, which is not something you can always say in the wrestling business in general, but I have backed a lot of Kickstarters that have never delivered anything, so I'm getting pretty wary of them these days. I don't know how Jason feels about that, but it seems like a lot of them don't ever come through.
Matt Hardy's getting the first email when I set that up.
speaking
No.
of which, I wanted to ask our friend Outlaw Adam Knight this. How many people, even though this isn't a wrestling book, we want to be clear about that. It's a book written by somebody who's been in the wrestling business. It's not a wrestling book, but how many people in wrestling have said to you, hey, I really love this book?
I'm actually having some very great responses. It's been fantastic. The first book's been self-published for 2 years now. It's maintaining a 4.5, almost 5-star rating on Amazon right now, which is more than I can ask for. People in wrestling that have picked up, take a look at it. My buddy Steve Carino picked it up. He was a big fan of it, and he put it over and actually gave a review on Amazon for it, which was very flattering, and I didn't ask him to do that at all. So that was very nice. A bunch of the guys locally picked it up, which has been good as well. If you're looking for name talents, pick it up and read it. Aside from Steve, I don't really know, but I'm hopeful of few. So we'll definitely see. I know Cabana was kind of blown away when I showed up at the merchandise table next to him in the show in Winnipeg, and I brought my books and put them there. So that was quite funny. When the king of gimmicks and merch is looking at you going, huh, I never thought of that. Of course you don't read, buddy. So that's
Bird! But yes, Cole Cabana's got more merch than just about anybody I know. So to shock him is doing something right.
Well, but between him, Darren Corbin, and Danny Duggan, it's like, there's no point in even having any merch when I show up.
Yeah,
I keep thinking I should get more T-shirts made. Then I show up into a show and I realize that 14 tables have been, put out, and 12 of them are being, hogged by 2 people. I'm like, all right, pricks. There you go.
T-shirts, headbands, DVDs, bumper stickers, wristbands.
Right?
Yeah, they got it all.
Old pairs of tights. That was an old Don Callis one. I'm not wearing these anymore, so I'll put them on the table in case anybody wants them. Don, nobody wants your sweaty ass tights.
Okay, that just led me down a road I really wanted to go down, because we've had many guests before who've talked about Cyrus the Virus, so it sounds like you've got a few good stories about Don Callis yourself.
Don is an interesting gentleman who's no longer in the wrestling business, who I had a love-hate relationship with. But at the end of the day, I got to put the guy over. He was one of the first guys with any name recognition out of Winnipeg that took a look at me, got me booked in a couple of tours, had a couple of matches with him back in the days when he was not, he was still on ECW TV and was doing some stuff, but basically was like, I don't want to get in there and do anything. I'm not going to get hurt. It's fine. I don't care. I know how to do this without getting hurt, Don. So it was fun. He liked working the big man because he knew I was a type of guy who would take a bunch of big bumps and make him look good, and that was fine. He didn't have to do anything, and I was still young, doing my thing, cutting my teeth, and don't want to, piss off the guy that's booked you. That said, my favorite Don Callis story, and here's one that I never thought I'd tell on a podcast, but screw it, it's a podcast. We were in Flin Flon, Manitoba, part of a northern summertime tour. So a whole bunch of us sitting around the bar table after the show, getting ready for our big trip up to the PA, which was 3.5 hours north afterwards, excuse me. We're all sitting around, having time a couple of beers, except me, because I'm, low guy in the totem pole, not making a lot of money, so I've had a beer. I'm sitting next to Don. Don's a funny cat. Sitting there, long hair, chewing his skull, hanging out, looking around, everyone's sort of involved in the conversation, he's not really paying any attention. For whatever reason, he decides to turn to his left and look me right in the eye and go, kid, sometime tonight, these pants are coming off.
What?
So I paused the beer halfway to my mouth, thinking I'm about to be involved in some kind of, horrifying adventure. And I look at him and, I sort of don't respond. I don't know what the correct response is to that statement.
There isn't. Go on.
I'm a young 23-year-old man, just happy to be on the tour, not really knowing anything, not really wanting to, blow my spot. Yeah, poor choice of words there. Anyway, that's all right. A couple minutes later, Don puts down his beer, and I swear to God, stands up, undoes the lace in his track pants, drops into his ankles, and sits back down. I swear to Christ, I'm the only one who noticed this. He went on as if nothing had happened. I continued on as if nothing had happened. Conversations continued around us. But Don was happy, just knowing that he was sitting there with, in his briefs, on this dirty-ass chair in the middle of a Flin Flon bar, smirking away, because for some reason, he's ribbing somebody. I don't know who it is. It may have been me, but I get you. In my opinion, I think, man, he's ribbing himself. But no, I'll never forget that. Sometime tonight, these pants are coming off.
Oh, that is a fantastic Don Callis story. Now, Jason, I know you saw some ECW in Pittsburgh back in the day. Do you have any similar Don Callis stories? You ever drop his pants in front of you?
Never see him drop his pants. That's like the first thing I think of when you mention him is Roller Jam.
Nice.
From
Okay.
back in the day when he just threatened to take ECW off the air because he was part of the network.
He was
Hey, man.
he was such a great heel. Go ahead, Adam.
No, that's it. Don had a hell of a run, and he was in many ways the smartest guy I ever met in wrestling because he showed up, he knew what he wanted. When he was ready to start, going and trying to make a career for himself, he went out, he did it. He got himself a job at the biggest company in the world. When that no longer was viable to him, he stopped taking so many bumps. He got booked to basically run his mouth, which is really all he wanted to do anyway. And when that sort of dried up, he had a education and a career to fall back on, and now he's quite happily working for the government of Manitoba here in Winnipeg.
Absolutely. We're glad he got out with all his faculties intact. And that's one thing I always worry about is people making the transition from pro wrestling to the rest of their life. Because it seems like a lot of people end up like in their 50s, 60s, 70s still trying to hang on to that pro wrestling dream. And obviously you've made a good transition. You're not completely done as pro wrestling. We haven't said you've hung up the tights, but at the same time, it seems like you've got the rest of your life mapped out. So how do you think we get wrestlers that are coming up today to recognize that there may not always be a future for them in wrestling? How do we get them to understand that?
Well, you just, when you're young, you think you got your whole life ahead of you. Then you get to about 25 and you realize, hey, I'm sort of at this quarter century mark. Maybe I should start taking a look at the next 25 years. That's what happened for me anyway. I realized I was about to turn 25 and I'd been wrestling pretty steady since I was, 18, 19 years old. I was a university dropout. I was, barely scraping by. Right? I was wrestling 4 or 5 times a week, but what did I have to show for it? And the answer was I didn't even have a car, Mm-hmm. So I had to look at that. Every time I went and did a show somewhere, I was, piling into the back of somebody else's car, and we were going somewhere else and traveling across the country. And I was coming back with enough food, enough, cash in my pocket to, buy $25 worth of groceries and make it through the next couple of days. And so that's not much for life, right? So you take a look at it, and you take a look at all the things you want in life and go, okay, well, how serious do I want to take this? And for me, myself, I went, okay, I have to get an education. I've got to have a real job I can, work, and then continue to pursue the dream. And that's fine with me, and there's nothing wrong with that. And that's the way I did it. In today's world, I tell guys, you've got several paths to success in anything you do in life. But at the end of the day, no matter which decision you make, you have to make it all the way. You can't, to steal no Robin Williams line, there's no such thing as a partial circumcision. You're either all in or you're all out.
So true. So
It's
true.
the way it is, right? If you're going to try and sit there, like, okay, I'm going to try to work 5 days a week and, only wrestle on weekends when I can, I'm like, okay, well, that's a good way to go. But if wrestling's really what you want to do, then you have to make sure that when the weekends come, you're on the road and you're doing those dates and you're making those dates and you're getting the tapes and you're building a reputation and you're doing everything you need to do in that regard. Any creative pursuit you do, if you want to, if you want to get into film or stunt work or anything like that, you got to go where the action is and you got to get your name out there and you got to be seen and you got to do it. Right? Living in Winnipeg, I love it here. This is my home. I'm going to be here probably the day I die. But the fact remains, I live in geographically probably the worst place in North America to be a pro wrestler. There's lots of action that comes through here now because Danny CWE does good business and Andrew Silverman of PCW is doing fine and stuff comes through. And don't get me wrong, WWE comes through now and then. But if you're trying to make a living doing this, or you're trying to make a career doing this, you got to be on the road a ton. Right? The next closest market that runs wrestling anything regular is Regina, Saskatchewan, and that's 6 hours away. I was making monthly trips out to Edmonton by car, which is a 12-hour drive for one show. If I want to travel to BC to do a weekend shot, okay, well, that's a 24-hour drive there and a 24-hour drive back. It's very, very difficult to go anywhere. And, of course, the United States is very close, but, lacking the proper work visa situation, you're always taking your life in your hands whenever you cross that border with your boots.
Yeah.
The way it is, man. Got to be very, very careful.
And we've known a few wrestlers and talked to a few wrestlers on this show who were smuggled across the border and back again in the trunk of somebody's car.
Yep.
It's amazing what you gotta do to make a living if you want to make it for wrestling. But speaking of which, I want to ask you if you've been on any of those Tony Condello death tours and if you have any good stories from that.
Well, the one I mentioned with Don was actually the summertime version of those tours, which I prefer, and I did a couple of the summertime ones. About my second year in, I was contacted by Tony. I was wondering, Moose, if you'd like to go and do the tour this winter with me. And I was flattered, and I knew all about the tours, and I'd heard about them, and I heard the stories from, Storm and Jericho and those guys. I'm like, oh, that's fantastic. I can't wait to do it. And that was like the first year in 15 years that the winter roads were not solid. Like, it was, honest to God, just not cold enough for the winter roads to hold up to do the tour, so we canceled it.
Oh, wow.
Right?
The ice didn't freeze. The roads weren't ready.
That's right. It just wasn't cold enough in February. It was, you drive on the rivers when you go up there that time of year.
Right.
That's the way it is.
Right.
There's no roads to get out there, and Tony wasn't going to pay for the biplane to get you the rest of the way, so you drove. So I had that option. That was, I guess, back in 1997 or 98. Let's say 97. Not the point. And then he gave me a call the next year, but I was busy. He gave me a call the year after that, and then I was busy. And I've just been busy for the last however many years. So, no, I've never done a winter Northern Hell death tour. And quite frankly, I'm not missing anything.
No, not based on some of the stories that we've heard. It's pretty rough. It's pretty brutal. But I've also heard some of the people we've interviewed say it teaches you how much you love pro wrestling. Because if you can do the death tour and come back with a smile on your face, you're cut out for this business.
And don't get me wrong. If I'd gone before I was 25, 26, I would have probably loved every second of it. Today, 38 years old, I got better things to do in my life.
Yeah, and you've got family at home and you want to come home to them.
Yeah, I got stuff to do. Nothing personal, right?
Exactly.
Like, I'm at a point right now that, as much as I'd like to be on the road more often, I don't really like to be on the road more than 2 hours away right now.
No.
And that's just me, right? I'm at a point in my career where, unless it's an excellent opportunity to go and do something, I'm more than happy biding my time, keeping in shape as best I can, and, working on my other pursuits. When a good opportunity comes along, I'm going to hit it out of the park, but I'm not as inclined to get in the car and drive for 8 to 12 hours for, just to do a show. I'm just not that guy anymore.
No, that's very understandable and very reasonable, too. I don't take any objection to that. I don't think anybody could, but I want
Oh, yeah, you get the occasional ones from the younger guys who don't understand, and I sort of smile at them and go, oh, one day you'll be my age, and hopefully you'll still have all of your faculties about you.
No, I'm pretty much at that point myself because I just turned 41 this year, and I used to want to go to every wrestling show and every MMA show, and I'm at that point now where it's like, if I go to a big event once every 6 months or a year, I'm kind of good with that.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, life catches up to you, and you have to make the most of it when you can. There's no other way of saying it.
No, there's no other way of saying it. So, you mentioned when you said you'd heard about the death tour from several other people, you mentioned a few names, Chris Jericho, Lance Storm. Storm's a friend of ours. We've had him on the show a couple of times, and I know he has a book club. Has he reviewed either of your books in his book club?
I should send one to him. I'm a little worried, though, that he may not enjoy them because, Lance being Lance, he likes what he likes and he doesn't like what he doesn't like. Though apparently he just started watching Orphan Black, which is sort of in the same genre that I'm writing in, not cloney, but I write urban fantasy genre, and so he might like it. I don't know. I will. I may front him a copy. We'll see. I certainly could use his rubber stamp of approval or his super kick of doom. Either one I would accept.
Yeah, and that's for sure. Lance Storm will be very honest about it. Have you had a chance to work with him in the ring at all?
Well, on that same tour I was just mentioning, where Don took his pants down, that tour, Storm was supposed to be on the entire tour with us, but that was right after WCW went down, and he got the call the first day of the tour saying, "We need your Calgary for on Monday." So he showed up. He did the Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then was on the plane Monday morning to make it back to Calgary. During that time, though, he was working main events with Lenny St. Clair, who was wrestling as Dr. Luther, and I was one of Luther's bitch boys at the time. So every night I got to eat a sweet super kick from Lance Storm until he left. So that was the extent of my interaction with Lance. Well, here's my favorite Lance Storm story for you. Because I was so used to working with guys that would sort of resent the fact that I was greener than they were, but I was getting some bookings that they weren't. Every time I got in the ring with some of these more veteran guys, if you will, they would take the opportunity to make sure they laid their stuff in a way that, I couldn't complain about. So for some reason, I don't know why, I was instinctually, as I get in there, working with Lance, beat him up a little bit, shoot him off, he slips the slam, I turn around, and I'm like, I don't care what happens. Back in my mind, I'm going to put my jaw out here, and if he takes my head off with a super kick, I am going to be just happy to be in the ring with him, because that's sort of what I was expecting. I'm a veteran guy, I'm a piece of garbage, I'm going to get my head taken off.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good thing that, I managed to sell face first to the ground, because otherwise everyone in the crowd would have been floored by the huge smile on my face after the lightest, most professional, it was like the toes of his boot caught the side of my chin and gently thrust it aside as he threw that kick. It looks amazing, felt even better. I couldn't believe it. It was it was at that moment as I'm lying there on the ground, I'm like, oh, that's how the pros do it. Okay, I get this now. All right, very good. So.
Yes, he's one of those guys that I always believe, from what I've heard and from what he said to us, he always believed in making it look real as opposed to it being real.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, right? It's got to look competitive and athletic, and Lance is just one of the very best of all time at it.
Indeed he is. But one other thing I wanted to mention before I kick it over to Jason, and then we'll start to wrap up. You mentioned the name Dr. Luther, and I've heard a lot of Dr. Luther's stories from our friend Paul Lazenby, somebody you might know pretty well as well. So what's your favorite Dr. Luther story? Yeah.
I always, Doc was great to me. When he was starting to make his comeback, where he got himself in really good shape, and this is God back in, I guess 97. He was doing, he stopped doing the Hannibal Lecter stuff and was doing more vampire-y sort of, leather and pleather stuff, and he was just huge. It was when I first met him, and I was sort of, his sidekick that whole time, me and a couple of the guys, looking like modern day for the late 90s, like gothic, whatever, we were his bitches. Anyway, so we were his ringside bitches, and that's fine. He was great to me. He was great for advice, great for helping me out, great for sort of pointing me in directions like, you should really be doing stuff like this, or, here's where you need to be in the ring. Doc he was a guy much like Chi-Chi Cruz and much like a bunch of guys who I met and worked with on the way up, who I'm always surprised never made it any further than they did. Not to say that he didn't have a good run or a good career, because he certainly did, but, considering his talents, I am always amazed that he never, got a headlining contract or, a good run on top. Well, not even on top, but a good run somewhere for one of the major companies. Dr. Luther was great. But I remember this story, though I don't remember the day, and I'll explain why in a bit. There's a match I had in 1999. Doc was on the show here in Winnipeg, and it was one of those rare occasions where I was working for my home company, and so I wasn't being one of his bitches. And I remember going to the match thinking, Doc does all this crazy stuff for FMW. I know I'm going to have this, false gun anywhere, weapons, bloodbath thing, and I'm looking forward to it, and I'm really hoping to impress him, because, I'm still 4 or 5 years into the business, and I'm thinking, it's more important to bleed and be, violent than just to actually have a good match. Anyways, I only remember this because I saw it on tape, and I remember being so excited to go and have this match, that when I woke up the next day with blood in my pillow going, what the hell happened? And, getting seeing Doc the next day for the tour, and he's looking at me going, are you okay? What the hell? You nearly killed yourself last night. I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. At that point, it's gave me the point of advice that says there's better ways to make your way in wrestling than the way that you're trying to do. And he was speaking clearly from experience. And that was the first piece of advice that I went, maybe I don't need to kill myself every night in order to get out there. Trust me, one day I'll upload that match online, and it'll be something else. It's just a train wreck doesn't really count, but I've had hardcore matches since then. I've been gimmick matches, and there's been blood and stuff. I'm not adverse to that sort of thing under the right circumstances. But that was damn near the frickin' that famous ECW incident where you can see the spurting coming out of the forehead. I probably lost 2 pints of blood. I had a gash that was ridiculous. I probably should have gone to the hospital, but I didn't. One of those nights, And for what? For a couple hundred people in Winnipeg that were so floored by what they saw they couldn't even react to it.
And it sounds like you might have had a couple of concussions on top of everything else.
I've had 2 documented concussions in 20 years of wrestling, and that's 2 concussions the doctor said, you have a concussion. Pretty sure I've been hit in the head a few times more than that.
Yeah, more than 2 for sure.
More than 2 for sure. That one is one where I know for sure, oh yeah, I had a concussion.
Yes. Well, yeah. on that somber note, Jason, I don't know if you have a concussion-related question, but I'm sure you've got a few other questions before we wrap it up.
Yeah, just what I want to throw out there before we wrap it up here. As you, Adam, said, you've traveled here and there and everywhere all over Canada. And I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, where in Canada has the best poutine?
Ha! If you're going to have a proper poutine, my friend, you have to go right to Montreal. You got to go to Montreal.
Montreal.
Yeah. Get yourself a Montreal smoked meat poutine. Best stuff you're ever going to get. Just about anywhere you go there. You know, if you really want yourself some potatoes slathered in fries with cheese curds, just go and get it done, man. That stuff is awesome.
Hey, I want to interject real quick. What amazed me about Montreal when I went there a few years ago was poutine was so ubiquitous. We went to a Greek Mediterranean restaurant and they had poutine on the menu.
Of course they did.
so I had myself a gyro and some poutine. I thought it was great.
Oh yeah, so you should. You're not going to get that anywhere else in the world, man. Absolutely. It's staple there. It's not it's a Montreal thing, not a not a ethnic thing.
No, but I think it has lore has spread it all over Canada, because even when I turn on the Food Network now, you see like people going to a ski resort in Canada and poutine's there.
Well, of course it is. You get people traveling all over the place. It's a Canadian thing, but it's a Montreal origin, you know, right? That's where you're going to get the best stuff. Come on.
Indeed.
That's the way it is. That'd be like saying where you get the best lobster. Well, you get that in Nova Scotia. Bar none.
Well, I think people in the United States might argue Maine or Boston.
Well, you know, considering Nova Scotia is about an hour north.
I know, geographically, but it's that whole American pride thing. Yes, basically it's the same region.
Nah, if I'm going to get a lobster, I got to go right to Boston and get it, you know, wicked awesome down there, I'll tell you. Don't be a queer. Get it down here in Boston. What you doing?
Okay, see, the buddy acting career is branching out right here. You can do this accent and do, you know, all sorts of, you know, gigs and commercials and movies. Let's just go that route.
Don't get me wrong. Voiceover work in cartoons would be my best job ever. I would love it.
All right, Jason, anything else before we wrap?
That's all I got for tonight.
All right. Well, I want to give Adam the chance to throw out a few more plugs for his books and anything else he's got coming up, any gigs, any appearances, and social media contacts and all that good stuff.
Follow me on Twitter. I am Outlaw AK on Twitter. You can get all my stuff on there. Obviously, I'm also on the Facebook, Outlaw Night on Facebook. You can check out the links for my books also on Facebook. The books are called, the series of books is called Overdrive. They're written by me, Adam Knight. You can pick them up on Amazon.com right now. First book is Cowboy Ending. It's had over 2,500 paid downloads. Thank you, everyone who's picked up a copy of that book on Kindle or ordered a print copy. It's been fantastic. It's been a career moment getting that done. Outlaw Justice has been out since July 1st, since Canada Day. I'm just cresting 300 paid downloads right now. Print copies going in stores very soon. I've got shows coming up in the next couple of weeks. I don't have anything specific for the next few weekends, but that's all right. All announcements for upcoming events will be done via my Twitter and all that other stuff. And I should finally have a professional website up and running by September, which is the goal. So when that happens, I'll be sure to link and plug and social media whore myself out there and get the information out.
And we will be sure to share it. We will definitely put it up because I know you've got a good publicist that works with you that helped us get in touch with you in the first place. So anything you've got coming up, we'll be sure to plug. And my final question before we let you go, Adam. I know you have to have run into Jordan Garber on the scene. Normally, he is here on our show as our third co-host, but he couldn't make it tonight because he had to be at work. So do you have any stories about Jordan Garber before we let you go?
He's a skinny kid. He's a good kid. His heart's in the right place. He's clearly working hard, and he's got a passion for wrestling, and those are all positives. Those are all positives. And much like anybody else, I think he's, like 12 years old, 13 years old?
he is the quintessential young boy right now. He's paying a lot of dues.
But that's, he's learning that paying his dues is important, that he's got to, follow that route. And the more he pays, the more he's going to understand about life, and that's good. And I want to thank you for mentioning, Mark, the publicist who put us in touch with each other. He's a guy I met at Cauliflower Alley in 2012, and he's been a great boon in my career, and I want to thank him personally for making this contact. And thank you guys for giving me a chance to blather about myself and about my work. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, we appreciate it too, and we appreciate Mark because he's gotten us a lot of great guests, and I've met him in person. He's a very great guy. So kudos
Wonderful
to Mark,
man.
and kudos to you as well. And we really appreciate the time tonight, and continued success with the books and everything else you're doing.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Hope to be in touch soon. Anytime you want to say out, I'd be happy to talk.
All right. Well, we'll do it again in the future. Take care, and until then.
Take care.
All right. Good night.
Bye.
And that was the Outlaw Adam Knight right here on Thursday Night AMP. Jason, I'd say that was a very successful interview for our show.
That was a lot of fun, yeah, with the two of us just going back and forth, and Adam telling his stories, and oh man, he's got some fun stories to tell. Let me tell you.
Yeah, I think we're just scratching the tip of the iceberg with some of the stories you can tell.